Diminished chords are funny things. In principle, they come in two different flavours. We have the standard diminished chord, which is written like this and played like this. So that's C diminished. And you'll see it, as you can see in the caption there, written either as C dim or C with a little dot above it, like a degrees sign. Okay. Then there's the diminished seventh chord. That's C diminished seventh. And in principle, you will usually see that written like this, C dim 7. That's complicated slightly because that difference is theoretical. If you're playing popular music or jazz and you're working from a lead sheet or whatever, and you see a diminished chord, it is almost always a diminished seventh. Even if it's only written as C dim, it usually implies a diminished seventh. Pure diminished chords are quite unusual. So, for all intents and purposes, and certainly for the purposes of this video, we're going to treat every diminished chord as if it's a diminished seventh. Okay, how do we go about making a diminished seventh? Very simple. We take a dominant seventh chord, let's say C7. Do we have the chord of C7? Okay, and the third, fifth and minor seventh notes, we drop each one by a semitone. Okay, so that is C7 and that is C diminished 7. Okay, as you can hear, it's a very different sound, quite eerie and spooky. A lot of diminished chords were used in film scores in the early days of Hollywood, but until quite recently, to indicate a sense of horror or trepidation or fear. It's a bit of a cliche now, but you still sometimes hear them. Another peculiarity of the diminished chord is the way that there are, in fact, there are only a limited number of diminished chords. Although you can build a diminished chord on any note of the scale, there aren't actually as many configurations as you might think. Let's look at the reason for that. That's C diminished 7. Okay, it contains C, E flat, G flat, and A. Okay, strictly speaking, that note is B double flat. Okay, because we've taken the dominant seventh chord and we've taken those notes down a semitone, so that, strictly speaking, B double flat. If you're reading from my book, How to Really Play the Piano, the section on diminished chords sometimes notates the top note as a double flat there. I'll talk some more about the book in a minute. Okay, so C diminished seventh, C, E flat, G flat, A. Okay, C sharp diminished seventh is different, D diminished seventh is different, but when we get to E flat diminished seventh, which might also of course be called D sharp diminished seventh, we get E flat, G flat, A and C. Okay, exactly the same notes as in C diminished seventh. The same thing happens with G flat diminished seventh and A diminished seventh. Okay. In fact, there are only 3 different diminished seventh chords. That's the first one, and that's C, E flat, G flat, and A. That's the second one, and that's D flat, E, G, and B flat, and that's the third one. Okay, and that's D, F, A flat, and B. Okay. That's not information you really need to make the most, to use diminished chords, but it's quite interesting nonetheless. You'll often see diminished chords in jazzy, bluesy, show-tuned type numbers. It's quite unusual in modern pop and ballads, but it's usually used as a passing chord rather than a central chord in a harmony. So you might get a chord progression like this. Quite interesting, worth playing about with, an interesting sound. as I say, you won't come across them that often. If you have some music books, some sheet music in your possession, it's quite well worth going through the chord sequences and looking at the contexts in which songwriters use diminished chords. If you look at music from the 20s and 30s, if you look at stuff by people like George Gershwin in particular, in fact, but Gershwin, Cole Porter, Richard Rodgers, all the great show tune writers of the 20s, 30s and 40s, they use diminished in quite interesting ways. And it also crops up in a lot of jazz in the 50s and 60s and into early jazz rock as well. But once rock and roll comes along, it's very short on diminished chords, and modern pop, not many diminished at all. You know, if you listen to a kind of pop pianist who writes fairly sophisticated songs, Ben Folds or someone, or even Elton John, you'll hear the odd diminished chord in there, but they're quite rare. Even so, worth knowing about. If you have any questions about diminished chords, by all means feel free to post them either in the thread on the YouTube page where this video is posted, or on the Jamcast post page where it is embedded. If you're looking at the video somewhere else, here's the Jamcast post page where you can head along and post comments. If you do post a comment or a question, I will come back to you and do my best to help you.